When it feels like fear, is there a way to reappraise it, to give it a different label in your mind and to harness that energy? Because it is energy, a racing heart, a worked up nervous system. That is energy. Can that energy be put towards something else?
Hey family, today we're talking with Dr. Emily Balcetis. Now, Dr. Balcetis is Associate Professor of Psychology at New York University. She's also an author. Her book, Clearer, Closer, Better, How Successful People See the World, is a must read. So if you haven't read it, get it. You'll really learn a lot of what she says in it through this conversation, and you'll want to dig deeper. Dr. Balcetis studies something that touches every one of us. How we see shapes what we believe and what we can do. Her research explores a powerful connection between perception and motivation, showing us that success often starts with changing the way we look at things. Whether it's setting goals, leading others, or finding the courage to keep going, her work reveals that we can literally train ourselves to see differently. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Emily Balcetis. Dr. Balcetis, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for coming on to Ask JVH.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, as am I, because you've invested your career exploring how people see not just with their eyes, but with their minds and hearts. And that really touches my heart. I want you to hit my mind a little bit with that today, too. Now, you study how the way we look at things shapes our goals, our motivations, and even how we see leadership or fairness. What first opened your eyes to this idea?
Well, I'm a scientist of motivation, but just like medical doctors get a common cold, motivation experts still need help understanding how to motivate themselves. So really, that was what inspired this. Doesn't matter how many decades of work I've done in this area, I still struggle to meet my goals, to feel a sense of satisfaction and forward progress. And I was looking first to start by helping myself and then others. I became my own guinea pig, I guess you could say.
Is that kind of a human phenomena, the struggle part of it I'm asking about?
Absolutely. There was a study that was done by the American Psychological Association asking people, how do you try to keep yourself motivated and what would work best? And the vast majority of people said, well, to talk to myself in encouraging ways, to remind myself of what my big goal is. But all of those things that people commonly think of actually take a lot of effort and investment themselves. You have to remember to do it. You have to engage all that effort and energy to keep yourself pepped up while you're maybe feeling like you're running on fumes to begin with. So that clued me in to maybe what is our knee-jerk reaction of how do I motivate myself to keep going and to do more, especially when I need that help? Maybe those aren't the right tactics to be using in that moment. And maybe there can be something else that we can throw into the mix.
And I'm recently a grandma. My grandma name is Ava, giver of life. And last year, my son and his wife gifted Aria Carolina. I'm from North Carolina, so we call her Carolina, to us. And then my daughter and her husband, Justin, gave us Jet. And I watched these two little babies, doctor. They are now just over a year old each. And when they are independent of each other, which thankfully is not that often because they live near each other and they all live near my California home, so we get to see each other a lot. I see them operating in their individual spaces with some common things they bring to when they're together, but I see some very different traits as well. When do we start to see or feel the struggle you're talking about? Often we hear people say, if you could see things through the eyes of a babe, and that's what I'm getting at. Do we lose something we're born with and therefore need to have the encouragement of a scientist like you and the teaching to get us back on track? Are we born that way, or can two things be true at the same time?
That is such a great question. And first of all, congratulations to have two new grandbabies at the same time is really amazing. And that they get to grow up with each other is so special. And there's so many amazing things about kids. I have two. My youngest is 3.5. So I still remember what one looks like. And what's so amazing about babies, one of the many things, is that the whole way that they learn about the world is through exploration, through trying. Now, it's really hard for them because they can't move their bodies. They can't use their voice. They can't ask for the things that they're trying to go for, but that's what they're working up to. And they don't have a lot of fear about their exploration. They're trying to get their hand in their mouth. They're trying to turn over so that they can grab something that they see over that way. They're trying to learn how to move those big bodies and crawl on their belly. And it's so beautiful to watch that because all that effort is exhausting. And that's why they sleep so much, that effort to explore. But that's what they're trying to do because that's their best way of learning. And I think as we get older, we get more afraid of that exploration because we bring all the psychological baggage to it. If we explore and we fail, if we explore and we don't reach what we're reaching for metaphorically, like those babies are reaching physically, when we are reaching metaphorically and we don't get it, we do so much negative self-talk. We might say like, oh, I shouldn't have been trying, or I didn't try hard enough. I don't belong in this space. And all of that reinforces not exploring. That kind of self-talk, which is fairly common, produces a fear that leads us to stop trying the next time there's an opportunity. And so that's what I think is pretty remarkable about these babies. They have other kinds of fear of separation, fear of loud noises. It's not that babies are born without fears. They're the kinds of fears that, evolutionarily speaking, have kept us alive, but they don't fear the exploration. And as adults, I think that we do. And that is a major fundamental difference that I think can really hold us back, what we do with that fear of exploration.
We're talking a lot about how we see things, and the definition of see broadens itself in this context then. So when we think about because we're talking about fear, right? How do we start to give fear this space in our minds, in our hearts? Is it through our experiences? Is it through seeing stuff? Where does it become not evolutionarily beneficial? Is that a fair question?
Absolutely. It's a fantastic question. Just last night, actually, I took my students up to a cultural center in Midtown Manhattan to listen to one of the world's leading experts on emotions. And he was really focused on fear. He's a neuroscientist, so he studies brain patterns. He actually studies it in mice and in rats to understand what happens in humans, because you can do so much more with different kinds of creatures. And what he explained last night, Professor Joe Ledoux, was that when you look at what's happening in the brain, as we're experiencing fear, there's different parts that light up. The amygdala is really active. Parts of our bodies like sweating or heart racing. These are all signatures of fear. We can experience that ourselves. But when you unpack that more, what is fear? Just like there are different ingredients that go into making a soup, he explained. You've got water, you've got salt, you've got celery, you've got carrots, maybe you've got chicken. Any one of those ingredients on their own is not a soup. But when you put them together, they become fear. Well, they become a soup, but in this case, they don't become fear unless you're afraid of soup. But all of those basic ingredients are not a soup until they come together. There are basic ingredients of fear also that when they come together and we decide that this is a recipe that has created fear, we give it that power. But a beating heart, a heart racing, sure, that's a sign of fear, but it's also a sign of excitement, of surprise, of running a race that you might really be wanting to do. There's lots of reasons that our heart races fast. We've decided that when it goes with these other ingredients, or in this situation, or right now, I'm just deciding this must be fear. We give it that power. When we feel dread, that can manifest as anxiety. But there's also anxiety that is positive and excitement. If you like surprise parties, or if you are trying to gift somebody an experience and you're looking forward to them receiving it, there might be some of that same feeling of like, but it can be positive. So there are these basic ingredients that when put together and we decide where that's going to be fear, it can be fear. But it can be something else if we decide that we want it to be something else. And that's what I'm getting at here. When it feels like fear, is there a way to reappraise it, to give it a different label in your mind and to harness that energy? Because it is energy, a racing heart, a worked up nervous system. That is energy. Can that energy be put towards something else? Oftentimes when we say, I'm afraid, we respond by freezing or fleeing. Also, fighting is an option. There are three responses. But two of those, there are two of those that aren't necessarily harmful. We don't have to fight, but we oftentimes flee or we freeze. What if instead we took those feelings that we decided are fear and lead us to fight, flee, or freeze and decided this is motivation instead, right? So we have that ability to use our brain and decide, I am feeling these ingredients. I think that I've labeled this as fear before, which leads me to do things that make it hard to continue on and persevere. But what if I decided that this is going to be a source of motivation and inspiration instead? And we try to rechannel those ingredients into something that's more productive. I actually think that we can.
That's so helpful and insightful. Is caution fear light, or is caution just wisdom earned from experiences of fear, or neither?
I think you're right that it's both. And it's not for me to say there's just one answer here. But what I think we can say is that it's a moment for caution. So when we're feeling that fear, we have fears for legitimate reasons. Maybe we're at the edge of a cliff. Maybe this is a building that's a dangerous place to be. Maybe we're with a person that actually could cause us harm. That fear that we feel, it can be informative and we should be tuned into it. We don't always just want to disregard it or decide like, oh, this is a good thing. I'm going to use this energy for good. But we can take a caution, take a beat and decide whether this is something that I legitimately need to walk out of, or is it something where I can move through it? So use our emotions as information, but also know that we might have a proclivity to interpret that information in a particular way that hasn't served us to the best of its ability in the past. And we do have the ability to use it in another way.
That's brilliant. Was there ever an experience, a moment in your life that really stood out to make you curious about how perceptions changes what we believe is possible?
Well, there's a really fun one, and it may not be all of that serious, but I think there are moments, there are analogs that are serious. But if you think of a few years back, there was a picture that went viral. It was of the dress. It was a famous dress, right? Is it blue and black or is it white and gold? And it took the internet by storm. Within 36 hours, it had been seen by, 25% of the entire world had seen and commented on what they thought. Is this a blue or a black dress or a white and a gold dress? And it really all just started because a woman went shopping with her daughter or went shopping and was trying to find the right dress, snapped a picture of a couple options that she had tried on in a dressing room that was really quite poorly lit, and was trying to ask her daughter for her opinion. And she was like, well, which one do you like better, the blue and black one or the green and red? And she's like, there's no blue and black one. There's only a white and gold one. And they're like, they kind of went crazy within their own family. And they're like, you tell me, people on the internet, who's right? Am I right or is my daughter right? And the answer, we know, the world does know what this dress was, but in the end, it doesn't matter because it was so polarizing, right? People were so certain. I saw it as white and gold. It is white and gold. People analyzed the color spectrum of it. They went to take measurements of what the fluorescent lighting was doing and tried to go to different stores to search out what this dress was. And so many scientific papers were written about this phenomenon and how could this be that the same image led so many people to see entirely different experiences? Now that I had already been doing research in this area for a really long time, but it's likely that your family who is listening now is aware of that dress going viral and that confidence that they probably felt when they saw it in one particular way. And it is so hard to see it how somebody else sees it. And when we use that as a metaphor or a simile for life, I think we can think of lots of examples. If, we have a goal that maybe we've set for how we want to grow our business, and others might have set a similar goal. And it might be really hard for one person to meet that goal, but really easy for somebody else. And if it's hard for you and easy for others, that can feel so defeating. Mm-hmm. So the way that we appraise and think about a goal that we've set, the progress that we've made, what it's going to take to meet that goal, even if it's the same for two different people, seeing, feeling, believing that it's different can have a huge impact on our motivation and our ability to succeed. So we can take that same situation, but what our mind does with it has a big impact on the next steps in our lived experience.
That is so true. And I can tell you, throughout my career, up to and including today, I've gone into circumstances where when I think back on how I looked at what I saw walking into a room or walking into an opportunity or challenge, how it impacted the whole strategy I put forward in front of me, and revisiting if I'd seen it differently, how would it look? I had a circumstance where I had presented to a potential client, and my mother is the best, forgive me, doctor. She wasn't a scientist, but she was one of the best mind people I've ever known. And I left a presentation that my brother and I had attended together. And when we were walking out, a young white woman said to me, I identify as African American. A young white woman said to me, she identified as white and female, that if more of your people were like you, you all would be so much more successful. Well, see, the response you had was the response I emotionally had. Now, my eyes kind of gave that, okay, this is a moment to smile, you know. And I called my mom when I got in the car, and I was like, Mom, I thought we smashed it. This was so great. If we win the business, I don't even care, you know, to get it because I was blah, blah, blah. And my mom said, hold up. What did she say that was offensive? And I repeated, you know, if more of your people, she said, did you ask her to define who you? Well, later, she told me I had referenced early in my presentation about being a member of a women's group of women who were business owners, and you know how I felt so grateful for the opportunity to be in there to represent for them. That's what she was referring to.
Okay.
I didn't have to ask her. She just came back and told me that. And I thought, I went through a lot of pain and emotion. My brother had to tap me. And, you know, what I went through was based on how I perceived what she said. What she had intended was something totally complementary to an experience I had shared I'd had. And so I thought about it because in your book, Clearer, Closer, Better, how successful people see the world. And here I am taking perceptions that really frame my success, but the success of thousands of others who depend on how I see the world, who work in my company. You wrote in that book that focus isn't just about discipline, it's about perspective. And I've taught discipline isn't a dirty word. I have not taught on perspective that often. Explain this, that focus isn't just about discipline, it's about perspective. Help me and help our family.
Oh, thank you. Perspective. I think, you know, to give a concrete example of perspective, we can think about in one of the stories that you just shared, you talked about looking back on your career and what you've accomplished. We also can look forward. And whether we look back, whether we look forward, or more importantly, when we look back versus when we look forward is a choice that we have to make. That's the perspective that we can flexibly shift. And knowing that, we now have doubled the number of tools that we have available in our motivational toolkit, right? We can, when is it effective to look back, to track our successes, to count up what we've accomplished? And when is it helpful to look forward, to count what do I have left to do before I cross the finish line? Those are both effective strategies, but sometimes one of them is more helpful than the other. You are a great example of an incredible success story, and you're highly committed. And there are probably lots of things that you don't doubt that you can accomplish. If the family that we're talking to right now finds themselves in that situation, they are committed, they are confident, and they've already had a track record of success. Looking forward is more motivating than looking backward, because especially when we're in the middle of something big, which is a place where a lot of people drop off, or they're feeling they're most defeated or the most overwhelmed because, yeah, you've made some progress, but it still feels like there's a long way to go. And how do you push through that when you're stuck in the middle? Looking forward for people in that situation, highly committed, accomplished individuals in this particular space, find inspiration by looking at, okay, this is what's left to go. They find energy from tracking that, what's on the to-do list left to cross that finish line. They don't find as much motivation by looking back on where have I come so far, for the most part because they didn't doubt that they could get halfway. They set the goal to go all the way. So it is not as inspiring to them to track their successes when they're in the middle, but instead to look at what is left to go, because that's not as much as the first big goal that they set. And so it seems manageable, it seems attainable and concrete and actionable. In contrast, people who are new to a venture, who maybe question their commitment because maybe this is a project that wasn't their baby, they didn't design it, but they're a part of it. And so the commitment doesn't feel as intrinsic to them, but they're still a part of the team. When they're feeling stuck in the middle, looking back on the past is motivating for several different reasons. One, because it's counting up your successes in this space. It's proving, it's an accountability manager for proving that you can succeed in this arena. But there's also something in psychology called sunk costs, which is the more that you put into something, the more a sense of ownership you have over it. So for those that are not as committed or they're new to a project, looking back is actually a signal that you have engaged in this area. You have spent resources in here, and wouldn't it be a shame if all of those went to waste? So looking back is more motivating for people who feel that this project right now, for who they are, there is perhaps less of a commitment or less certainty that they're going to get the job done. So we just can think about perspective as a flexible tool that we can use, not necessarily just always, in all cases, but to take a moment to self-assess, where am I? What kind of project is this? And how am I feeling about my odds of success? And when that's low, look back. And when it's high, look forward.
You know, that's awesome. And I love how you broke it down, placing us in the middle of a journey or at a certain point in a journey. Now, when we look around us, and we don't have to look very far, but we can look globally, people are feeling really challenged right now, and they're expressing frustrations with what they believe they see going on around them. I would even say at times they're not realizing what positions they pose within the picture. How can people start to shift the way they look at their goals so that they can stay hopeful or confident, even when that finish line you're talking about feels far away? Dr. Balcetis, how can they reposition themselves to improve the picture is what I'm asking.
I think right now, I feel like probably every generation or every decade we say we're in unprecedented times. So I actually do think that that is true now. And I think one of the markers of it is that there's just sort of a looming feeling of threat. Doesn't matter what your politics are. You could argue it doesn't matter what your identity is. Everybody is feeling a sense of threat, whether the threat is true, whether it's not, whether it's more for some people or whether it's not. We're living in this feeling of doom. We're all afraid of what other people are going to do to us. And threat is really challenging. It's a taxing place to live. It leads to elevated cortisol levels. When we live with elevated feelings of stress, it makes it harder for us to sleep. It makes us hard to engage working memory. Our memory isn't working as well. We get really narrowly focused. It's hard to be creative and expansive when we're feeling like we're living under that threat. When that feeling of threat gets so extreme, psychologists and other scientists find that our tactic that we use to respond to that is to manage our emotions. When we feel an extreme amount of stress, we just want to help ourselves feel better. And that's pretty much all of what drives us, or that's a major driver. Now, trying to manage our emotions is important. Trying to reduce our stress levels is important. But if that's the only thing that we're focusing on, we miss opportunities for growth, for progress, and for innovation. So how can we do that? If we are feeling like we're living under this cloud of threat, it can be difficult for any one person to change that, to change what is happening with our entire ecosphere at the level of our country right now, or the societies that we live in. But when we focus on what do we have control over, we can actually leverage that threat just like we can leverage fear and turn it into a motivator. But we need to feel that sense of control. Now, we can't control what the federal government is doing. We can't control what's happening at the level of our local politics. Sometimes we can't control what's happening within some of the major institutions that govern our lives. But there's a lot of things that we do have control over. We control our bodies, we control our mind, and we can control our family and friends around us to some degree. We have that power. So sometimes it might just take a moment of meditation or reflection to remind ourselves in this world where we feel so scared, when we feel so under threat, that our values are under threat, what do we have control over? And going through that affirmation exercise, reminding ourselves, perhaps daily, perhaps routinely, what we do have control over, that's a beautiful convergence. You can take that anxiety, that arousal, that fear, that uncertainty, and know and remind ourselves, we have that power to do something with that. We have control. That can be motivating and that can be energizing. There's lots of science that shows us that when you combine threat with control, that's when you get people engaged in collective action, coming together to make beautiful change happen, to try to make the world a better place. But with only one of those in the mix, people are left to just try to manage their emotions and feel better. And oftentimes that doesn't mean taking action to help the world be better.
That's so incredible. And I thank you for that. You mentioned meditation, and I recall during the time that the discussion around uh, uh, the change in the healthcare laws was going on, I was consulted. And one of the things that I had mentioned was, well, actually, I advocated for acupuncture being covered, but also meditation is one of the best healthcare tools we have that's so rarely used, in perspective to the population. And when you look at the martial arts, I think they use meditation throughout as a form of strength, not just inner strength, but it actually builds physical strength. You're a scientist. Is there anything to that, or is that just old baloney?
No, it's not baloney. There's a lot of great physiology on that. Barbara Fredrickson is a psychologist who studied the impact of emotions. What happens when we're in a state of feeling negative emotions versus positive emotions? What's beautiful about what she found is that when you experience positive emotions, that's when we're our most creative selves. We can find connections that we couldn't have seen before. We can pull from over here, we can pull from over there and find something and create something beautiful out of two thoughts that we never thought had anything to do with each other before. That's when innovation happens, is when we're experiencing those positive emotions. We've probably all had the experience of feeling really overwhelmed, feeling really anxious, ruminations. That's when we're just stuck in this loop where we aren't pulling. We can't figure out a way out of there. We keep rehashing the same one or two or three thoughts. That's what happens with negative emotions. So we need to find a way to quell that, to quiet our mind so that there's more room for the positivity to emerge, so that we can pull ourselves out of the ruminative loop and to be able to be our most creative, beautiful selves. And meditation is a way to do that. Part of meditation is just acknowledging what is happening, being aware of what is happening in our own minds, trying to take stock of where are we at? What is the thought that keeps coming in, to notice it and then to tell it to just wash away like it's going down the river. Other people find it helpful to write it down, because once you write it down, it's accounted for somewhere. I don't have to keep holding it in my own mind. That is such an emotional labor and takes a physical toll to just keep what we're stewing over cycling through our own mind, and the externalization of seeing it written down somewhere else, even if no one else sees it. It's a private journal that you're writing in, or it's a piece of paper you write it on and then you let it burn and it's gone. That can be a physical, visual signal that we're trying to release it and to let it go, which can then open up space, if we repeat that practice, for other thoughts and other emotions to come in.
That's incredible. And I remember my mom teaching us to meditate before prayer. She said, God will receive prayer anytime, anywhere. If you want it received with the best outcome, meditate a little bit before your prayer, before your prayers. I shared with you that I'm enjoying the incredible blessing and joy of being a new grandma. And my two grandbabies live minutes away from each other, and they're growing up very, very close. Dr. Balcetis, it blows my mind the multitudes of feelings and experiences and the opportunities that they are offering me as I watch them. And you talked about babies and, so when I observe the shaping of the conditions to their first impressions that we have, for their impressions of the family and the world, I see it as an awesome responsibility. One thing I'm reaffirming, though, is that when it comes to leadership or trust, our first impressions often form before we even realize it's happening. Can we reshape those impressions that aren't working well for us, regardless of where we are in life's journey? We talked a little bit about, you, how you explained looking back or looking forward. How do we reshape if something isn't working well?
Well, I think first is understanding why is that the case. I think a lot of times when we feel like something isn't working for us, we engage in self-blame. What is wrong with my brain that it's stuck here, that I can't see a different way forward? Or we have a really fixed orientation on how things work. If this is what's happening, this is just the way that it is, I guess. And that's pretty defeatist. But why do we have those reactions? Our brain is set up to have that be what is happening, but it doesn't mean it's the only thing that can happen. There's something called the primacy effect and the recency effect. We remember things that happen first, primacy, and we remember things that happen most recently, recency effect. But stuff that happens in the middle gets lost. That's why first impressions matter so much, because first impressions are both primacy and recency. When you're meeting somebody for the first time, both of those factors converge. It's the first time and the most recent time that I'm getting a perspective about somebody. That's why first impressions are so powerful. It leverages two of these like basic cognitive tendencies that we have that really drives how memory works and what sticks with us. That's why they're so sticky. But we don't have to just accept that and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. One other factor is called negativity dominance. That what is negative in our environment just gets greater weight in our memory and our experiences than the stuff that's positive. People have tried to compute ratios and say like, well, if somebody gave me one negative insult, how many positive compliments do they need to give before I can let that one go away? And it's 5 or it's 7. It doesn't really matter the exact number, but it's more than 1 to 1. It takes a lot of positivity to negate something that's negative that has happened. So those are 3 psychological cognitive tendencies that we have that can lead to this experience that you've just outlined. But we also know that there's something called psychological fresh starts. And we can decide, I'm going to wipe the slate clean. We have that power with our own mind. That's why so many people believe in New Year's resolutions, right? That's a psychological fresh start. The start of a new year, 1/1/2026, right? It feels big. But why does 1/1/2026 feel any bigger than 12/17/2025? Because we've decided that New Year's Day, New Year's resolutions mean something for our society, and maybe they mean something for us personally. That is a psychological fresh start. We give ourselves a blank page to decide, what is this year going to look like for us? What new goals do I want to have? But we can impart any day with meaning if we decide to. Big birthdays. Why does turning 40? Why does turning 50? Why does that matter so much more than 39 or 41? They don't, except we decided that it does. We are doing that. Our minds are doing that, creating great psychological meaning off of something that is arbitrary relative to anything before or after. That's pretty powerful, but we can leverage that power if we decide that we want it to. So yes, primacy, recency, negativity, dominance are cognitive heuristics, cognitive tendencies that we have that can set us up for thinking about a person or ourselves in a particular way. But if we decide we want to wipe the slate clean, we can come up with a way to give ourselves a psychological fresh start and try again.
I love that. I love that so much. And, a lot of people are feeling they need that right now.
Yeah.
Learning how to do that, or even learning that they can do that in that way, is huge. Um, with so much convergence of activities and things happening so much, not just bigger, but faster. The confusion on where we are in the middle of that is getting bigger too. And people are making snap judgments. We live in a TikTok type world. How can we start to slow down snap judgments and see people and circumstances more fully, more clearly for what and who they really are?
It's a habit, right? Doing that is a habit that we have created. And so then we need to recognize this is a knee jerk response that we have to make a quick judgment about somebody. And how do we break habits? They're hard to break. Fresh starts is a way to break a habit. To be intentional and to be slow is also ways that we can break habits. So what are tactics that we can use to slow our brain down, slow our body down? Because oftentimes that knee-jerk reaction to pass judgment on somebody manifests also as a behavior. To write a snarky comment on social media, to mouth off to somebody because they've irritated you or they've poked a trigger of yours. But what can we do to slow down to make sure that how we respond to our emotional reaction that might be immediate reflects the choice that we actually want to make and not just this habit, especially when we're trying to break a habit. So how do we slow down? Well, we can use that emotional trigger that we are feeling, that emotional reaction of like anger, annoyance, disgust. Use that emotion as information, but try to remind ourselves of a mantra. If I feel disgusted, if I feel anger, I'm going to pause and take 2 deep breaths. I'm going to take 1 deep breath. And that is probably a different response than what our typical one is. Using that kind of phrasing of if this, then this, and repeating that to ourselves, it's a script. It's a formula. It's a prescription, like a doctor writes a prescription for medication. It's a prescription we've written for our own psychological well-being. If I experience annoyance, I'm going to take 1 deep breath and reflect on what I want to do. And then make an intentional choice rather than a habitual knee-jerk choice about how I want to respond. Maybe you're still going to respond in the same way, but it'll have been an intentional choice and not an automatic response that you might later regret or that adds fuel to the fire.
That makes so much sense. And some of this stuff we know, hearing you explain it in the way you are is so very helpful. One of the things you keep talking about, doctor, is keeping your eyes on the prize. I interpret that as focusing on what matters most instead of everything at once. Now, eyes on the prize was a big theme for the civil rights movement in the USA, and that became really important in a different directional way. How does this type of focus, though, keeping your eyes on the prize, help us lead better, work smarter, or even simply stay grounded when life is feeling so big right now?
Thanks for bringing that up about the eyes on the prize being tied to the civil rights movement. It's become such a almost cliche, it is a cliched phrase, but often when people say that, they mean something that's negative. But that its origins, when you look up that phrase, you're right that it's tied to the lyrics of a song from the civil rights movement that was, a song that brought communities together, that was a reminder about the goals that the civil rights movement was working towards. And some people forget that or don't even know it in the first place. So it's beautiful to bring it back to arguably its origin.
That's what our parents used to tell us in our house, and it was commonly spoken in the community. Because when you look at me, you're looking at someone who grew up during that movement, and I was one of the first year to integrate schools in my small town community. And when I would go through things like having feces and urine thrown on me, that kind of stuff at school, my mom and dad used to send me off every morning telling me to keep your eyes on the prize, right? And I thought it was helpful to not shoot off or react in a strong or negative way that could put me physically as well as academically in danger. But it also helped me to be able to smile without smirking through circumstances that were rough. And so I really wanted to lay that in front of you as a scientist and help you explain to us, the why in that. How does that help us lead better?
That's an incredible story, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that that was your experience in school, and it's such a tremendous one because of all the restraint and the restraint that you had to show, the resilience that you demonstrated. And all of those are skills that like clearly you built at a really early age, and I am sure contribute to what you've accomplished in your life as an entrepreneur. It's really incredible what you had to overcome. I can, parts of it. I think a lot of people won't have that experience that you've had in their life, but they might resonate with some aspects of it. Of in the moment, there is an extreme obstacle that you have to push through, and it requires resilience. It requires resisting temptation, like you said, to not smirk, to hold that smile, and to keep walking through the feces, walking through the obstacles and moving forward. And how do you keep doing that? Keeping your eyes on the prize. What does that mean? It means thinking about, if I can not take the bait right now, what am I going to win in the end? I'm going to win in education, right? I'm going to win my right to sit in this seat and to learn from these great teachers and to be a part of this world fully. And that's what you're reminding yourself of, I imagine, as you're saying, like, keep your eyes on the prize as you're walking into school. What that does psychologically is take what is a pretty distant, far off reward of owning a place in this world and connecting it to the here and now. This is happening to me right now. This awful, traumatic, disgusting experience is happening right now, but I'm going to jump over that and connect it to the future. So many people struggle to do that. That is really hard to do psychologically, to connect the dots between the here and now and a distant, far off reward. But the more that we can connect that dots, we can shrink the space. Keeping your eyes on the prize is metaphoric. It can also be literal, and it can be somewhere in between by using visual imagery. What's it going to be like when I'm sitting in that classroom, when I'm with the teacher who cares for me and respects me? How can I take that imagery right now and use that as an attractor, as a motivator to move through this extreme obstacle in the moment? There are other ways that this manifests as well outside of the civil rights movement. We can think about people who need to overcome temptations. It might be thinking about, how am I going to pay the rent today? How am I going to pay this expense today? When my goal is also to be able to have a thriving business in the future, there's an immediate temptation of an immediate need that might be quite salient, while at the same time, savings might be important for the long-term goal. How do you reconcile that? The immediate short-term need and this long-term goal, and balance that. And a lot of people understandably prioritize the immediate need. If I can't get through today, there is no tomorrow. Once we get to a place where we can start to think about tomorrow, then we have options. But it's still challenging to overcome the temptation of addressing today's wants and needs. That's a challenge that so many people can resonate with. So how do we do that? When we got to the place where we can think about tomorrow, how do we make a choice that prioritizes tomorrow at the expense of today? And that's where this visual imagery of keeping our eyes on the prize can be most useful, because it helps pull that distant future into the present. And it makes it easier to see how today's sacrifice will be beneficial for a future me that will reap those rewards. When you think about, in 5 years' time, what will I look like? What will my family look like? What will my house look like? What will my business look like? We take an abstract feeling and we make it a concrete visual. We make it vivid. We make it salient. We make it as full and rich as today's lived experience. That future self can be, through hard work of visual imagery, just as concrete. And it makes it easier to choose for that outcome and to overcome the temptation of our immediate present that might present. So visual imagery is really powerful for keeping our eyes on the prize and overcoming the temptations and the challenges of today when we're working for something that might not reap benefits until quite far into the future.
That is powerful. You're right. I remember Diana Ross saying that before she would go into business meetings, once she saw herself as more than just a singer, and she would go into her own business meeting, she said she would visualize the night before or sometime before everything that might come up, everything that may be asked, and the different energies she may encounter in the room, and she would mentally prepare herself beforehand so she could go in. And I guess for preparing in that way gave her a toolkit to be able to do some of what you're saying, keeping her eyes on what do I want to have come out of this, and it allowed her to be less focused on herself as a professional who had earned a living, having other people focus on her to be able to be different in that space. A lot of people get taught on a different mindset, doctor, to stay positive and ignore the negative. And if I understand correctly, your research suggests that acknowledging the negative, the tough stuff actually helps make us stronger. Can you lean in on that a little bit for the family?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all fear and avoid thinking about failure because we use the word failure, and that's part of the problem. Nobody wants to be a failure. Nobody wants to envision themselves being a failure. So that word is really stigmatizing. But when we think about obstacles, that's not so bad to think about obstacles. We all experience obstacles along the way. And if we spend our time early on thinking about obstacles, they're not as scary and threatening. So what I advise and what the science suggests is actually really quite effective is in those moments when we're planning big, when we're thinking about what we want to accomplish in life, those are fun moments. Thinking about what could my future look like? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? That's a really positive energy. And what do we do next? Well, afterwards, we start thinking concretely. Okay, what do I need to get done to connect the dots between right now and where I want to be? We start pairing that visionary thinking with concrete actions. In those moments, we should also start thinking about the obstacles, the points at which failure is a possibility, the ways in which failure is a possibility. And maybe we don't use that word because that word is scary and stigmatizing, but we think about obstacles and challenges. Because in that moment, when we're most excited and positive, that's when we're our most creative selves. We can think about what is it that I might experience? And if this happens, if I run into this obstacle, what's my plan B? What's my plan C? And outlining that, foreshadowing failure, considering those obstacles and the backup plans in advance when we are our most positive and creative selves is a safety net. And so if we can think about foreshadowing obstacles or foreshadowing failures as actually going through the hard work of giving ourselves safety nets, maybe it's not so challenging to go through that work. And what a beauty it is if we do, because when, not if, we experience obstacles, that's probably not the time when we have the time and the resources to do our best work to troubleshoot how are we going to get out of them. But if we've already done that, then we can quickly pivot to that plan B, C, or D that we've already thought of and be more likely to push through. There's some really cool science that I wanted to share too about what is that experience like? What happens when we go through that work? And colleagues of mine at New York University actually studied what happens to our bodies when we do that work. And they measured systolic blood pressure. So that is, part of our blood pressure reading, and it's an indicator of how our heart is working, how hard it is pumping for sure. But we also know that it's an indicator of people's readiness to get up and do something. So they've measured this in, not my colleagues, but others have measured this in horses as they are in the stalls about to have the gates open and for them to race across the track. They are in a confined space, but that's when their systolic blood pressure, moments before the gates open, peaks. They're anticipating. That anticipation ramps their body up and ramps up systolic blood pressure. Math whizzes who are about to sit down and do some challenging math problems, they are sitting. They are just going to be thinking. Systolic blood pressure goes up in anticipation of knowing I'm going to need to focus up here to get something hard done. So what my colleagues at New York University did was look at what happens when we start dreaming big and planning for the obstacles. When we just dream big, they found that systolic blood pressure actually goes down. It's as if we have imagined our future, we're happy with that, And we're sort of relaxing because we've vicariously satisfied that need of feeling, what's it going to be like? What's it going to look like? Oh, that's pretty good. Cool. I like it. But that means that we're de-energizing, we're demotivating ourselves, we're relaxing as if we've already satisfied the goal. But those people that imagine what that distant, like what that beautiful future will look like, and then started thinking about how might it go wrong and what am I going to do, their systolic blood pressure went up. Their body was mobilizing energy to start taking the next steps that they would need to make forward progress on this goal that mattered to them. So that's how foreshadowing failure, if we even want to use that word, can actually be extremely beneficial.
That's interesting. One guest on Ask JBH, Queen Ariane Simone, and how she gained that title of queen is such an interesting journey. I hope you enjoy her podcast, her visit to this podcast. But where she started from was Detroit. And she shared with me that I was right. The world does see Detroit and they see a lot of issues. She said her family groomed her to see opportunities. And so even when she came into issues later in her life, they were opportunities that she had the confidence and the desire to work through. And she is such a beautiful inside and out person, doctor, that I think she examples what you're talking about here. And it's just a miracle to me that you shared that in such a beautiful scientific way.
Can I share one more example of a company that institutes this and how they use it in their organization?
Yes, please.
So Google, we know Google's Division X is one of those that's responsible for some of their biggest innovations. It's one of the divisions that's given the greatest leeway to just explore and see what's possible as the next big project that they might take on. Now, there's big reward in being a part of those teams, but there's big risk because you still have to produce at the end of the day. And oftentimes they don't. And that can be really challenging, right? You feel like your job is on the line. You're in a high status department within a major international prestigious organization. To feel like all of your products are going to be misses and not hits can be really scary. And that might lead a lot of people to want to protect their reputation and maybe maybe take smaller steps to ensure that success happens along the way. But one thing that Google X does to continue to foster that entrepreneurial leaning into the possibility for innovation is that they have kind of like science fairs, but it's not science fairs of successes. It's science fairs of misses. It's things where teams are up against a roadblock that they don't know how to move through. So they're not showcasing their finest moments. They're showcasing some of their darkest ones that we as individuals might otherwise want to just hide. We don't want our bosses to see what's not working. We don't want our competitors who are a part of a different team to realize how much money we've wasted or where we can't figure out a solution. They celebrate those moments. They showcase them. They normalize the experience of having challenges where you're just stuck. And they put it on display. They have different teams move through and try to offer creative solutions and work collaboratively to find a new way forward. They also give away awards for the biggest failure, the project, the biggest risk and didn't succeed, and that they're going to kill. And they reward rather than penalize those projects. They give those teams an honorary status, first of all. They just say, we acknowledge this. We praise you for your attempts to go big and for realizing it's time to throw in the towel.
Like the biggest blooper.
Exactly. And it's not shameful. It's prideful because it's also meaning we're not going to keep throwing resources at something that we all agree can't be moved forward. And so that helps people to not be afraid of taking risks because they know they're not going to be stigmatized for it. And it normalizes that experience so people aren't afraid to ask for help and to talk. Because it's telling everybody in the division, all these teams struggle and they're putting that forward rather than trying to hide it. So that's another way of thinking about obstacles and failures is that we, of course, want to hide those from public view. But what if we didn't? What could happen if we didn't do that.
what if we didn't is huge. I mean, I visited several of our national labs, and you're familiar with the national labs as a scientist. And I remember going through one, and I was told the story that this young lady was sticking notes to herself up on her cubicle, and some gentlemen were walking through, and what she had been using was what was considered a failure. It was an attempt that scientists had looked to figure out, how do we glue planes together instead of having to nail and screw them together, thinking it would make them stronger and firmer. And it was a dismal failure. But when she put it on display in her cubicle, sticking paper up to it, the folks left there and they created the 3M sticky note pads that we all use and built a business out of it, you know. And so when you were talking, that came back to me about putting failures on display. They may be failures in the way we intended them, but they can be successes if we just rethink how they can be useful. And I think that's so beautiful. We're talking about things that have stories to them and still are scientific or clinical in nature. Doctor, allow me to ask you a bit of a personal question. Because our family connects when we hear somebody's lived experience. Everybody's talking about your lived experiences these days. Can you perhaps share how being vulnerable to facing some of the tough stuff in your own life has shaped your career, and how you experienced any time specifically when facing obstacles head on might actually have helped you move through it? And I ask you that because you're sitting here teaching with such a brilliant, and I said it when you first came on, your smile wowed me. I was excited about you coming on, and then I saw your smile. Um, can you get prick through the clinical and share maybe something personal that evidences forward for us, so we
Mm-hmm.
know the you in your teaching?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'm up for promotion. I have one last level to achieve, and then that's the biggest title in my field that we can get. And we all have those things that we're striving for, the next level of success in whatever it is that we're doing. And that might be personally set, might be externally set, might be a corporate ladder that we're climbing up. Well, academia has one too, and I've got one last rung to go. And it's challenging because that opportunity comes at the same time that all of the major opportunities in my life are coming. To be a relatively new mom still. I have two kids. I have a 9-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. And I have a strong, healthy marriage that is work to maintain. And I have two aging parents who have given me the most beautiful life because of how completely selfless they've been throughout their entire life, and still so. They moved halfway across the country just so they could see my first child and now my second child grow up, and they gave up everything for that, everything to just be a part of our life, left all of their family and friends. And so now when they need help, of course I'm going to be the one to help them. So all of this is a lot of weight. We all have that. All have the weight. That's my weight, is all of these things that are really core to my values. I don't value just getting to that last rung in my career, but what that reflects for me, it reflects a commitment to education and to bringing up the next generation of scientists, of scholars who might cure cancer, who might figure out a cure to anxiety and depression and mental illness, who might change our world. And I get to play a role in that. And fostering that learning community is really critical to me. And so how do I juggle it all? Not well. I have to, well, I mean, well enough, but I personally feel like, oh my God, I'm hardly keeping my head above water. And so I struggle myself with just feeling like I'm doing something that matters, that I'm spending my time in the right way, and that I'm giving all these other people who are a part of my world what they deserve. And I struggle with that. And that causes me anxiety, like a lot of anxiety, of just feeling like I'm not enough in all of the things that really matter to me. And so how do I manage my anxiety? Well, we've talked about the meditation, and I'm working on that. And it's so hard to just say, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go, because that ruminative, negative self-talk actually isn't moving anything forward. And I got to let that go, because to get the job done, I got to stop telling myself I'm doing a bad job and just do the job. And how do I let that go? That's hard. Just as a concrete example, a meditation coach that I'm working with, and maybe part of the family already knows this and uses it, but it was new to me, of just as we focus on our breathing, we think about box breathing. That's something people use a lot. Breathe in for 3, hold for 3, let it go for 3, hold for 3, and then repeat, right? But he also added in, like, why don't we pay just as much attention to the space between our breaths as we do to the breaths itself? And that to me was like revolutionary, because it meant there's double the space. There's double the opportunity. There's double the time when I start thinking about the space in between, not just the thing of breathing, not just the thing of doing, but what about what happens in between? And that not only helped with my breathing and pacing the breathing and calming my mind, but it was like a whole new outlook on life, to be honest, about what about the spaces in between? We're running to this, we're doing that. We're doing this thing, we're doing that thing, but what about the space in between? And is there opportunity to leverage that space in between to do something that's healthy and good also? And maybe that's where more time in our day comes from, where more opportunity comes from, when we feel like we're being squished from all sides, is being really mindful about that space in between. So that's sort of my mantra right now, is trying to be more mindful about that space in between things, in between people, in between opportunities, in between breaths in and out.
That is beautiful. One of the people who has been the most impactful in my life is my beautiful husband, Bernie. Bernie was born a Britishman. He became a U.S. citizen long before I married him. And one of the things he said to me during the process of me building my business, and I would come home and, how you share with your spouse what's going on. And I was sharing a lot of negative stuff that was heavy for me. And he said, well, how does it make you feel? And I said, well, I'm worried. And I gave the list of worries, doctor. Mm-hmm. And he said something to me that reshaped how I manage stress and fear. He said, Lovey, I won't try to imitate his British accent. I'm Southern born. Although there is an island off of North Carolina where the Shakespearean actors go to study, because they still speak the language much the way it was spoken during Shakespearean times, because of lack of movement from that island. Wow. Anyway, Bernie shared with me, doctor, that he said, Lovey, I've got a few years on you, and I will guarantee you, if worrying works, I'd be the richest man on earth. I just can't remember one time when my worry made anything pay off. And so he reshaped how he handled stress. This is what I can do about it. This is what I don't think I can do about it. And where can I go to learn more about it? And he used that as his tripod, right? And he had the most beautiful energy and presence. I've not mastered that tripod to create the art of my life I'd love, but it certainly did come to mind when you were talking. And like when I did a little bit of study, I learned that your research on a different level shows how early perception changes the types of leaders we become. So Bernie learned late in life about worry, but your work says early perception shapes the types of leaders we become. Yeah. What shifts do you think then, doctor, need to happen in schools, media, or workplaces that can support more people seeing ourselves as capable of leading, whether we're leading people, initiatives, or whatever, but basically manifesting fullness in our lives?
I've been one of my newest lines of research in the last 10 years or so is looking at exactly that question and working with adolescents in the New York City area, especially in some of the most under-resourced schools in the nation's largest public school system. It also happens to be one of the most racially segregated public school. It is the most racially segregated public school systems in the United States. In terms of the children that go to different schools, You couple that with who are the teachers in these schools, and the teachers don't reflect the students that are in the schools, especially given the segregation that happens within the school district. The burnout rate for Black teachers is higher than for any other demographic group of teachers. Burnout for all teachers is too high. It's the most beautiful, important job that we have in this country, and the most underappreciated. And that hits people in different ways, leading. So when you put all that together, what it means is that there are a lot of kids who don't get to see leaders who look like them in their schools, and they don't get to see that continuity of leadership that looks like them. And what's the impact of that? That's what we're studying. What's the impact, and what can we do to help that? So I've worked with thousands, tens of thousands of kids now, trying to understand what their experience is like, to trying to understand what's happening within their communities, so that we can figure out ways to help them see a possibility when maybe that's not being manifested within the current leadership structure that they're seeing around them. And what is so beautiful is that when you look at what middle schoolers and high schoolers think, like when I ask them, give them a box of Crayola crayons, of what Crayola calls multicultural crayons, which means there's more than one version of skin tone in that box and they have options, and give them a blank piece of paper and tell them, draw what a leader looks like. As you think about a leader in your mind right now, draw what leadership looks like. And those pictures are beautiful because they represent a greater diversity than what we see in leadership and what they see in their leaders around them. So there's hope and possibility. There's also stereotypic depictions that they draw too. So how do we hold on to that beautiful drawing that they create when I get to sit with them and see what leadership looks like to them, so that they continue to see that diversity as possibility and continue to see themselves as having leadership potential? Role models matter. So, we have the ability to offer mentorship and serve as role models, even if we don't feel that we have the power to actually shape the demographics of leadership as one individual person. We do have the ability to shape who's a role model for kids on a personal level. And that matters because it's not just the sheer number of people that they see in leadership, but the connection that they can make to somebody who looks like them. That can support them continuing to draw leaders with different colors of Crayola crayons. To expand their stereotypic conception of what leadership does look like. Leadership doesn't have to be the loudest person in the room. What else does it take to be a leader? The beautiful art of quiet listening. Being quiet is just as important in a leader as being loud and talkative. And if you feel that I'm not a leader because I'm not the loudest one in the room, I'm not the bravest one to be the first to talk, even if I'm not being the loudest, I'm also not bravest to be the first. That's just as important in leadership. And being able to cultivate these messages of difference and finding value in what is not the stereotype, we all have the possibility of doing that, to continue to support these kids using colors that are outside of the narrow box that they might otherwise think.
Wow. You're bringing several thoughts to me. Thank you so much for that. One thought, my sister Trish, who works in my organization, is an engineer. And she was asked when she did a reading room for a kindergarten. No, it wasn't kindergarten. I think it was third or fourth grade. And all the kids were seated around her on the floor, and she was on a little stool in the center. And she was reading Cinderella to them. Not Cinderella, Cinderella. And the kids at the finish were so excited. And she said she wore a tiara and she wore her naturally curly hair long and she wore a fluffy dress so she could be as close to Cinderella as she could, present to those kids. And one of the kids asked her, what's it like to live your dream job? Because she had told them, they could dream big and have jobs and be what they want to be, etc. And she said she had to pause. She said, sister, I had to pause on that. I said, well, why did you have to pause? Mind you, she's working for me, right? You're living your dream job. She said, because working for you is not my dream job. She said, my dream job was to be a teacher. She said, well, I couldn't afford to. I had to be an engineer to sustain my life. And when you spoke to valuing teachers and, and appraising their work on the level that it deserves when they're creating everything about our people in the future. And so she did end up, she said, telling them, I'm doing it right now and it feels really good. Um, the other thing you brought to mind for me is that my hometown, I learned from two young men who are educators themselves today, and they are the sons of one of my high school classmates, reached out to me. And mind you, I'm from a small town in North Carolina, doctor. These two young men are teaching in North Carolina in the school systems there. One is a principal of a school. And they said, we want to help you realize your vision. They know my vision is about education and together we win, right? How do we do that? That's a bigger story than this moment allows because I got a question for you in this. So they reached out and fast forward, we've now started the BH2 Stream School. Um, I did deeper study than they provided me. And the thing that you talk about perception, the thing that stood out for me amongst all the study that I looked at, there were two things. My hometown has produced an incredible, and it's less than 12,000 people, has produced an incredible number of professional athletes. And the reading level at high school graduation for the school in my hometown is fourth to sixth grade level. And I thought there's a gap in here that can be filled. And so when these men asked me about joining them to start a stream school, um, they had me at the word school, right?
Yeah.
Well, doctor, we went in and presented to a 50-person panel, and we received our charter in the moment of the presentation. The
Wow.
last person to question us of the 50 had the question for the panel versus us. What can we go ahead and approve? Now, this stream school is science, technology, engineering, AI, and math.
Mm.
My question for you is, what would you think we should absolutely include in our we're gonna open classes in January. We should absolutely include in the culture of how we deliver this academic teaching. You're the type of scientist and you have the experience, I think, that may offer us this.
Mm. Well, that's incredible. Congratulations. And what a gift to the community. It's so exciting, especially to be on the brink of it just a few months into the future. That's so exciting. Um, Lots of thoughts. There's lots of things that I could pull from. And one that we haven't touched on yet is the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. That is so important in education. And I'm certain that you have heard about and that you live the growth mindset. Michelle Obama had a great clip that I always come back to where she's speaking to a group of fourth graders, I think, and her words are very serious. She's looking them each in the eye and she says, what I need you to know is that nobody is born smart. Nobody. Right. And it's like, whew, she got their attention, right? What do you, I'm not smart. I'm not, wait. And she's, no, you're not born smart, right? It's an important difference. And of course you're not born smart. We're not. And she goes on to say, you're not born knowing how to do math. You're not born knowing how to play some instrument, right? Those are all things you have to learn. And it takes a lot of hard work. And that is that belief really leaning into that is what a growth mindset means. Of course, we aren't born smart. We learn everything. But why do we lose that understanding? Or why isn't that at the forefront of our minds? Why do we start self-diagnosing? Well, I'm not a math person. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not an engineer. How do we go from like really understanding what she's saying? I'm not born smart. Of course, we all agree with that, to then deciding I'm not born this way. I'm not born that way. We're not born anyway, right? So something happens where we start thinking it's okay to talk that way to ourselves, to say I'm not a X kind of person, when we don't we didn't believe that. We don't believe it when she reminds us that we're not born smart, and don't we all agree with that? So what happens? And that's something to really think about. Like, where does that kind of self-labeling come from that is so limiting and so damaging? And what can we do about it? Well, it takes a lot to undo that kind of mindset, that kind of self-talk and self-thinking. But one quick step that we can take when we hear ourselves saying it, when we hear our kids, when we hear our family saying it, because other people are listening too, when people say that, is to add the word yet. I'm not a math person yet. And that means something entirely different than I'm not a math person. Mm-hmm. That is a label that we'll never be able to shed if we really believe it. But adding the word yet puts us into a growth mindset, because it does mean with the hard work that Michelle Obama reminds us of, and with that perseverance and finding the right mentorship, using the right tactics, that yet might become a now. I'm a math person now.
Oh, I'm so excited to share this with the Herring brothers. The school is BH2 Stream, Bryant, Howroyd, Herring. I'm so excited to share that with them. Thank you for that. Doctor, you've studied motivation from every angle, and you've also lived it. What have you come to understand about the balance between pushing hard for what we want and then giving ourselves room to breathe? I think we can carry some of that into how we both lead in our businesses and in the schools too.
I think grace is so hard to give to ourselves, maybe harder to give to ourselves than so many other people, that that it's easier to dole that out to. We are always a work in progress. And so when it feels like we're stumbling the most, that's a time for a fresh start. It's a time to try a new tactic, pull out a different tool from our toolbox, and give ourselves the grace to just move forward and try something different.
Beautiful.
So I think that is my last message of give to ourselves what we might more easily give to others.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, your work does remind us how we see shapes and influence how we live, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at the world right now and all its challenges and possibilities, what do you most hope? We talked about eyes on the prize. People keep their eyes on.
Mm-hmm. That's a tough one, because I'm feeling the dread and the weight of the world too. I think I might be able to offer an example and not necessarily a prescription. But when I think about AI and the conversations that happen about AI, there's so much fear around it. What happens when it becomes conscious? What happens when it takes over society? What happens when it kills us off as humans? And that is scary. And that is dark. And it's too late to do anything about it because we've already messed it up and it's going to take us over. But what about but I've also heard amazing stories. Recently, I just heard a story about a company that's using AI to figure out a new way to deliver vaccines and medicines that can help us maybe open up a whole new way to cure cancer. And that was so exciting. And this untapped potential was a real opportunity. So, and I was asking somebody, why is so many of these conversations about AI doom and gloom? And why can't there be more like what this company is doing with medicine development? And somebody said, because we are afraid of the future. We're already living. So what do we have left is to think about dying. We already know what living looks like. So now we're thinking about dying because that's the unknown. That's right. We have the choice, and we can think about the fear of the unknown and the dying, or we can celebrate the living that we're doing and the possibilities that living offers us. We have the option to change our perspective.
I love it. I thank you. Should we go 4 for 4?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So I promise to keep you within somewhere around the hour and a half. So we're getting there, Doctor, but it's just such an illuminating conversation. I'm going to ask you 4 questions to which you'll give me 4 answers. There are no right or wrong answers. And the first one is, you get to host a dinner party for any 4 people from the past or present. Let's not do a humanoid, okay? Who's at your table and why?
I want Michelle Obama. That's my number one. And maybe Oprah would be pretty great to have to see the two of them together. I would kind of love that also. I'm
What
a
a
big
beast.
Yeah, I know, right? The food would be great. So would the clothing. That would be amazing. I'm a big fan of jazz. So there's any number. I think McCoy Tyner. He's one of my favorite jazz piano players. I want him. I want him at my table, and I would probably pull in a visual artist of some kind. I don't know, just mix it up. Marina Abramovich. She's an amazing visual artist who has just pushed her body and her mind to the strongest limits, and I think that would be a pretty incredible eclectic group.
Oh, that would be amazing. I'm going to serve so I can be in the room, okay? I'll be happy to suit up for the occasion. Let's go two for two. What four pieces of music are you listening to right now? Artist or genre, and why?
Um, that's a hard one because it probably reflects the four people that are in our family right now. So, let's see. Conference of the Birds is a jazz tune that I've just got my head stuck on right now, and Afro Blue. Those are the two that I've been playing on loop just in the last 2 days. Those are my choices.
Huh?
My daughter's is "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift. She knows all the words at 3 years old. That's a good one. That's a good motto for life too. Is just shake it off.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband, it's Led Zeppelin. So anything from Led Zeppelin right now, that's on loop. And for my son, he's really into AI generated music right now. So that's what we got going on, reflecting.
Oh, wow. That's a great house, though, huh? That's a great house, Doctor.
We are a house of musicians. So we go in all directions, really.
Love it, love it, love it. Think about it. Just 7 notes and so many different musics and messages.
Yeah.
Wow. What 4 books do you recommend to our family that they are must reads, and why?
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I got a couple of them up here. Cultures of Growth is one. That's a great book that talks about fixed and growth mindsets for sure, and how that shows up in companies. It takes a real entrepreneurial perspective on cultures of growth, showing and how you can create that within companies. It's also applicable for families and for yourself. I think it's important to read fiction and not just nonfiction. That's the world that my brain usually lives in. But I was just in the library, and like you just see every week how many thousands of new books are coming out, and I am just always amazed at the stories that we come up with to keep telling all the new stories. So any fiction that grabs us is important for just keeping that creative brain growing. I'm reading one right now. It's called Boy Mom. I'm pretty sure it's over there. Boy Mom. It's about how do you raise. This is as a white family. How do you raise a white boy with precarious manhood? I think it's more than just about being white, but I think it's particularly about being white and coming and having privilege. And how do you raise children who are born with privilege based on race or any other form of privilege to have them still to recognize and to make good choices for how to leverage that privilege in life and do the right thing with it. So that one is one I'm reading right now as a parent. And what's a fourth? Oh, my daughter is just in the most beautiful stage where you get such great life lessons out of the picture books. I think there's one like Gifts of Joy or Gifts of Love that's just helping expand our emotional palette and to remind us of how do we tune into all our different emotional experiences. And it's sort of fun to see an adult world through a children's storybook and to remind us of some of our most fundamental messages in life that we can always be reminded of as adults too.
Oh, you are so true on that. Just last night, I read 14 times The Big Red Barn to Ari. As she sat on my lap, she just loved it, and she stayed attentive to it. And at some point, I wasn't reading; I was just improvising. And she, so you are so right. You are so right. Seeing adult life through child's eyes. Oh, okay. We're there. 4 for 4.
Okay.
What 4 pieces of advice, Doctor, do you give to the family today? And why? And if it's advice that was shared to you by another, please pay homage to the author.
Absolutely. This comes from my mentor in graduate school, David Dunning. And his reminder always was social comparison is an evil thing, but personal comparison is really helpful. So comparing against other people, if it's somebody who's doing better than you, you usually just feel bad about it. There's that, or it feels unattainable and it might not be that motivating. When you compare against somebody who's not doing as well as you, maybe it feels good for a second, but it's not going to be useful for finding your own path forward. Instead, just tracking your own successes, tracking your own obstacles, and comparing where you are now against where you were and where you want to be is the best recipe for success. So that one I have at the forefront of my mind and teach that to anybody who will listen, because I feel like that's been really beneficial for me. Okay, another piece of advice is to become our own accountant. If we just are left to our own memory, then negativity dominance is a thing that we've already talked about, but we might not be able to accurately assess how we're doing. We might overinflate our successes, we might overinflate our obstacles, and we might be left with the wrong impression of how we're doing. So take some time to collect data on ourselves, whatever it is, personal, professional, organizational goals we have. If it really matters to us, take some time to actually keep track of how we're spending our time, how we're allocating our emotional labor, so that we can chart our own trajectory. Becoming our own accountant, I think, is really a useful piece of advice. To let our emotions be a signal and not overtake us. Our emotions are there for a reason. They're a good indicator. They're a piece of information, but they don't have to override all of what we're doing. Use them as information and have that help guide an intentional choice. We don't have to discount them. We don't have to feel guilty about them. We don't have to try to get rid of them, but we can use them as one of many tools to guide our choices. And lastly, our professional goals that we have in life are amazing and beautiful, and I have them too, but our personal relationships matter more. Without support, we can't get anything done. We are not an army of one. We can't do this world alone. So unless we have that strong foundation of support by investing in our relationships with other people, nothing else matters.
Oh, wow. That's a mic drop right there.
Yeah.
That's what's going to get you that next level, that last at the apex. Dr. Balcetis, it has been such a joy to talk with you, to listen and to learn from you. Thank you so much. Please come back.
I hope so. It's been an honor to listen to your stories and to be a part of this community. You are such an inspiration, and to get to even be a little bit a part of your life for this last hour is a true honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Happy holidays.